Lesson number two. We are now looking, if you look at the objective here, determine the form of government or control throughout Malawi's history. Malawi has had many kind of different forms of government and types of control over Malawi throughout their history. And I'm just going to kind of go over a timeline for you. So North Carolina State course of studies to compare the sources of power and governmental authority in various societies. So we're going to look at that specifically with Malawi and the different time frames of the different forms of government and control throughout their history from the beginning up to currently. So that's our focus today. And so here's looking at Malawi's history and government. Here's what your form should look like, your organizer for today's lesson. Now, what I want you to do, okay, is I've given you the dates. I've basically given you a timeline. And in that timeline, you're going to see the date. You're going to see what happened on that day, like the event, okay? And then you're going to see two blank columns to the right. One's called one color, labeled color, and the other justification. What you need to do is, based on the information that you hear in the presentation and the information that's in the slideshow and in this left column, determine what form of government or control was in Malawi at that time, okay? So if you look at this first one, and I'll just speak to this briefly, and then we'll get into the presentation. Scottish missionary David Livingstone's exploration of the region paves the way for missionaries, European adventurers, and traders. So David Livingstone, a Scottish missionary, came to Malawi, gave the nickname to Lake Malawi, Lake of Stars, because it looked like stars at night, okay, or twinkling in the water. All right, so he goes there, and that leads the way for the British to then follow and take control. So for me, what I did, and I don't know if it's done on yours, if not, change the color. I changed the color of this column here to black, of that cell. And I put my justification. David Livingstone's exploration led to the British colonizing the region. Okay, so that is modeling what you should do on your document. So each time that, okay, for each event, you need to change the color of that third column to match, okay, what's going on up here. Imperialism, so controlled by an outside nation or country, okay, that's going to be black. If it is a dictatorship, if it has characteristics of a dictatorship at that time, you're going to change that cell to red and write why you chose a dictatorship, okay, why it represents more of a dictatorship at that time. And then if it is more of a democracy, you're going to make that cell green for that date and explain why it is more of a democracy at that time. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So if it represents more of a dictatorship, you're going to change it to red, this third column, and write why it's more of a dictatorship. If it's more of a democracy, you turn it green and explain why it is more of a democracy. And if the British are in control of that area, then you're going to have it be black to represent imperialism and explain why. All right, so let's look at some of these dates specifically. And I may go quick. I don't know, maybe you think I'm going too slow. Ms. Jones or Mr. Giblin can go quicker, speed it up, or slow it down, depending on what each class needs. But let's continue here. So again, 1850, David Livingstone, a Scottish missionary, is exploring this region of Africa, southeastern Africa, where Malawi is. And it kind of gets the terrain and what everything's like there. And he goes back, right, to Scotland, to Great Britain, and talks about this area. And since he's explored it now it opens up that area for exploration by other Europeans. Okay, and so that's kind of what happens here. And it all starts around 1850 for the Europeans starting to arrive to southeastern Africa. So 1891, the British established Nyasaland, which is this modern day region of Malawi. So that would be the name, okay, again, of Malawi that I believe was in your prior video, okay, the Edpuzzle video. So Britain establishes Nyasaland, so that should be your clue there, that box, the color in that third column should be black, because this is about the British are having that control and making that decision. Okay, so if it's 1891, it should be black, and then because the British are in control, or the British are taking control. Okay, I know I'm moving, maybe a little quick, so he teaches again composite if necessary. You can just let them know in the chat, okay, and they can manage the pace of this lesson. 1915, Reverend John Chilembwe. Okay, at this time, the British are in control. You have a lot of British plantations and people managing the land and employing and even enslaving Malawians. And to fight for the freedom and hopefully lead a revolt, John Chilembwe decided to go to one of these estates that was known for being brutal towards the Malawian people. They went in and took the managers and beheaded some of them and displayed their heads outside of his church. Okay, the revolt did not stick. The revolt ended, and they ended up finding him and killing him within days. But he is known as a freedom fighter, and here you see him on their Malawian currency, the kwacha at this time. So when I was there, I was friends with a lot of school teachers, and they're like, "Hey, we got the day off because it's John Chilembwe Day." They celebrate, and he's the main freedom fighter that they celebrate. That fought for the rights and the freedom of Malawi from the British. Okay. Okay, 1944, nationalists. So in the right column here on your organizer, I believe it says you should inquire and define what the term nationalists mean. So here I'm talking Malawian nationalists or sub-Saharan African. Okay, so Malawian nationalists, they established this political group and party called the Nyasaland African Congress, this group of African leaders. Okay, so maybe take a minute, look up what the term nationalist means. I'll play a little music here, and then I'll move things forward in just a second. So hopefully at this point you've established that a nationalist is someone who's extremely proud of their nation. So at this point, they're going to be proud of their Malawian heritage and background and want this independence from Great Britain. Because that's what we're moving towards here. So 1958, Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda. And the stadiums in Malawi are named after him. You got Kamuzu Highway, all these different things named after Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda. He's referred to as the Black Messiah, almost like the Black Savior of the Malawian people. He's completely against the British control, and he comes back to lead the Nyasaland African Congress after studying in both Great Britain and the United States. So the British are still in control, but you're starting to see this movement and trend towards maybe Malawian independence from the British government, from Great Britain, from European control. Okay. July 6, 1964, so Nyasaland declares independence. So at this point, you see a lot of African nations gaining independence and getting themselves out from under European imperialism or control or colonization. Okay, so they declare independence. Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda is the leader, the Black Messiah again, and he becomes the president. Now, he ends up ruling over a one-party system where there's only one political party, and he remains in control for the next 3 decades or 30 years. So right here in 1964, we should have a transition of one of the colors. Honestly, it should be black this entire time up until now because the British have been in control. Okay, so maybe now's a good time to discuss as a class what color is best here as the government or type of control transitions in Malawi. Okay, and I'll play a little music while that transition occurs here. All right, so here we go. 1971, okay, he's voted president for life, okay? Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda is voted president for life. It may actually not even be on your organizer. If it is, though, make sure that you choose the appropriate color and choose the appropriate justification on why you picked that color. 78, they have elections, okay? They have elections, but here's the deal. All potential candidates must belong to the same party. Now, it's not the Nyasaland African Congress now it's the Malawi Congress, okay? That's the political party. So if you're gonna run, you need to be a part of Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda's party, and he has to approve you, and you are submitted to an English test in order to, so reality is, I want you to think through and maybe discuss a little bit, right? In order to have a democracy, you have to have a free and fair election, one where there are the same requirements for everybody. It's fair, it's free, everyone can participate, right, for the most part. Okay, that's what you're looking at when it comes to a democracy. You can't be fooled and tricked by this idea of an election. Most countries have elections, even ones with dictators. They're still going to say they have an election. But the reality is there's really only one person that is ultimately going to win. Okay? All right, so go ahead and complete your organizer for 1978. And then I'm going to move quickly through probably the rest of them here. All right, here we go. 1980s. Several ministers and politicians. When we talk about ministers, we're not talking about pastors, priests, religious leaders. We're talking about people that have been appointed to like political positions of power, people that work in the government. Okay, many are killed or charged with treason. Okay, attempting to like overthrow the government. So Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda reshuffles his ministers quickly and regularly so no one can ever gain momentum and organize any sort of revolution against him. Okay, so kind of see how things are continuing in this similar path. 93 though, and again, you look, y'all, that's 1980s, throughout the 80s. Now we're in 93, he becomes sick. One of the big things that you probably learned from the Arab Spring is dictators usually don't give up their power. They don't give up their control. Often the only way is if they're forcefully overthrown, or there's so much pressure, like in the Arab Spring, or they get sick, right? Or they just die of old age. So that's what you have here. So now there's this big opportunity for Malawi to either stay down this path or change up their form of government a little bit. So the voters in a referendum or a law, they reject this idea of a one party. And they make this decision that you have to have multiple parties. You can't just have one party and same rule for long periods of time. So in 1994, they have an election. Wikili Maluzi becomes the elected president of the first multi-party election, where again, you have more than just one party. So you're always going to have multiple people on the ballot. You're getting closer to a free and fair election. He immediately frees the political prisoners and reestablishes again this right of freedom of speech. Okay. 99, President Maluzi, he's reelected for a second and final 5-year term. I think that's intentional, right? A final 5-year term, because that's kind of representing this idea of term limits. Okay. That limits someone's ability to stay in control for a long period of time. 2004, new election. Bingu wa Mutharika becomes the president. He was actually the president while I was there in 2009. And one of his big things was AIDS was spreading rapidly throughout Malawi and sub-Saharan Africa. So his big push was, let's find some international allies to help with medicine and treatment and education related to and to stop the spread of AIDS throughout Malawi. 2009, he wins a second term. just before, honestly, just before I arrived there. 2011, I don't think it's just a coincidence that this is 2011. I want you to think about what we studied in the last unit, the last mini unit, still in Africa and the Middle East, right? But yeah, in July of 2011, I remember this specifically. Bingu wa Mutharika was sick. In fact, in a way, like he disappeared, like gone. And nobody heard anything from him. Nobody heard anything from the people that were closest to him. The vice president was kept in the dark, okay? And people weren't happy with the way things were going. So there were anti-government protests, just kind of showing their dissatisfaction. If you think about that statement of inquiry, right? Discontent creates change, wanting things to improve. There were anti-government protests. 19 people were killed by the government, like government forces, like police and the military. And the British and other people halted aid until they figured it out and they fixed it. Okay. Eventually they did and transitioned power to Joyce Banda because Bingu wa Mutharika did die. And they, even though his brother, Peter Mutharika, tried to grab power, okay, they still kept with their constitution, which was great. And Joyce Banda, the vice president, became the leader and president of Malawi. She was not popular because she devalued the kwacha, which hurt the local economy, but she felt that it was necessary based on pressure from international organizations and banks. But nonetheless, she became the president in April of 2012. Okay, then there's an election a couple years later, and Peter Mutharika does win the election. He was Bingu's brother, and he does legally, officially, in a free and fair election, become the president of Malawi in 2014. 2019, it's a little different here. 2019, he wins again by 159,000 votes, but they annulled the election. They called it unfair, and they said we got to redo it. Okay, there are too many imperfections, too many issues with tampering of potential votes. And so they did another election the very next year, 2020, and Lazarus Chakwera wins the election, it's really odd. And when I was doing some of my reading, it's really odd for a opposition leader, somebody that is not the current leader, to challenge a vote and then come back with a new vote that wins the election. Okay, usually maybe the current leadership will sorry, too soon, right? Will challenge the vote, and if there's a re-election or something, then usually that person that's already in power remains in power. Okay, but here you have the challenger, the opposition leader winning the election. So now is a good time to make sure you understand the expectations again of that document and the colors that go in that third column and your justification in the right column. So I'll go back briefly. There you go. Right. So again, imperialism is this idea when someone on the outside controls your country, such as the British in this example, coming and controlling Malawi or Nyasaland at the time. Okay. So that color, as long as the British are in control, should be black in this third column. And you need to write why. Okay. These are justification. And then as things transition and continue, you'll get into different forms of government, either more of a dictatorship or more of a democracy. Okay, so go ahead and make sure that you are completing that according to the expectations of your teacher, please.